Welcome to Animal Uncovered, the podcast where we explore the most unbelievable life cycles in the natural world. From the moment life begins to the moment it ends, nothing is as simple as it seems. Somewhere in the tall grasses at the edge of a meadow, just as the light of an October morning begins to thin and cool, something is happening that almost no one will ever witness. A cluster of pale, papery foam, no larger than a golf ball fixed to the underside of a wooden fence post, has been sitting there since late summer. Hardened by weeks of sun and rain, it looks like nothing more than a forgotten piece of natural debris. A piece of dried spit, perhaps, the remnant of something that no longer matters. Most people who passed this fence in the intervening weeks gave it no thought at all. A few may have noticed it and wondered briefly before moving on. But this morning the foam begins to move, not all at once, not dramatically. It starts at one corner, a faint rippling beneath the surface, as though the material itself has become restless. Then a crack appears, a thin, dark seam splitting the casing along an invisible fault line, and from that seam something emerges. It is tiny, translucent. It looks, in these first moments, almost alien. A creature assembled from the finest possible threads of life, its body suspended on legs so slender they barely seem capable of bearing weight. Its antennae sweep the air with a methodical precision that is entirely out of proportion with its size. It is, at this moment, perhaps 4 millimeters long. It is also already entirely itself. Within minutes, dozens more follow. They pour from the egg case in a slow, determined stream, each one a miniature version of something that will, if it survives, become one of the most extraordinary predators in the insect world. They dry their bodies in the morning air, they test their legs, and then, with a quiet urgency that belies their fragility, they begin to disperse, each one moving away from the others, each one already alone. This is the praying mantis, and from the very first breath it takes, the entire world is trying to kill it. Most of these nymphs, these tiny, perfect, translucent hunters, will be dead within days, eaten by spiders, picked off by birds, starved before they ever make a successful kill of their own. Out of an egg case that may have contained anywhere from 10 to 400 individuals, only a handful will reach adulthood, and of those, only 1 or 2 may ever reproduce. And yet the species persists. It has persisted in one form or another for over 85 million years. It has survived mass extinctions, continental drift, the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, and the slow, relentless transformation of every ecosystem it has ever inhabited. To understand how, we have to go back to the beginning, not just of this individual, but of the entire lineage that produced it. Part 1. Why this animal matters. There are few creatures in the insect world that carry as much cultural weight as the praying mantis. The name alone does something to the imagination. It conjures images of stillness, of patience, of a kind of lethal serenity. The mantis is an animal associated across dozens of cultures and centuries with something almost spiritual. A creature that seems, when you watch it, to be thinking. In ancient Greece, the mantis was believed to have supernatural powers of divination. The very word, mantis, is Greek for prophet or seer. In parts of southern Africa, the San people revered a mantis deity, a trickster god named Kagan, who was said to have created the moon by throwing his shoe into the sky. In China, the mantis gave its name to an entire style of kung fu, praying mantis boxing, a martial art designed to mimic the creature's explosive, precise strikes. In French folklore, if a lost child asked a mantis for directions, the insect would turn and point the way home with one of its raptorial forelimbs. The myths vary wildly. The science is, if anything, even stranger. The praying mantis is the only known invertebrate capable of turning its head independently to track prey. It can perceive depth using a form of stereoscopic vision, much like our own, but achieved through an entirely different neural mechanism. It is capable of striking with such speed that the movement is invisible to the naked human eye, a strike that can be completed in under 50 milliseconds, roughly 15 times faster than the blink of a human eye. It can detect the echolocation calls of hunting bats and perform evasive aerial maneuvers in the dark. It practices sexual cannibalism, one of the most misunderstood and debated behaviors in all of entomology. And then there is the life cycle. The life of a praying mantis is not a long one. Most species live for less than a year. But within that year, they pass through a sequence of events so dramatic, so biologically precise, and so ruthlessly governed by survival pressures that it reads almost like fiction. Birth without nurturing, childhood as an act of war, adulthood as a brief, extraordinary window of predatory perfection, followed by reproduction, and then, almost immediately, death. The central question this episode asks is a simple one. How does an animal that begins life as a 4mm thread of near-invisible tissue become one of the most effective ambush predators on Earth? And how does it accomplish the entire arc of its existence in under 12 months? The answer touches on evolution, neuroscience, ecology, and some of the most astonishing behavioral adaptations ever documented in the natural world. Part 2. Evolution and Origins. To understand the praying mantis, you need to understand where it came from, and just how ancient its fundamental design really is. The mantis belongs to the order Mantidae, a group that today contains roughly 2,400 known species distributed across tropical and temperate regions on every continent except Antarctica. For a long time, taxonomists grouped them together with cockroaches and termites under a broader classification. That relationship is not incidental. The mantis shares a deep evolutionary ancestor with the cockroach, one of the oldest and most successful insect lineages ever to have evolved. If you look carefully at a mantis nymph in its earliest instars, you can still see something of that ancestral heritage in the way it holds its body low, the way it moves. The earliest mantis fossils we have date to the Cretaceous period, roughly 85 to 100 million years ago. These ancient creatures lived alongside the last of the non-avian dinosaurs in forests that were just beginning to fill with flowering plants. They were already recognizably mantis-like, elongated, with grasping forelimbs and a triangular head. Evolution, in this case, had arrived at a solution so effective that it saw little reason to dramatically revise it. There is a fossil from the Eocene epoch, approximately 47 million years old, preserved in Baltic amber. A mantis caught mid-stride, its legs still articulated, its form almost indistinguishable from species alive today. Looking at it, you're looking at an animal whose basic architecture has not needed significant revision in tens of millions of years. That is not stagnation. That is perfection. The raptorial forelimbs, the grasping spined arms that give the mantis its iconic silhouette, are believed to have evolved from an ancestral leg form shared with cockroach relatives. Over millions of years of selection pressure, the first pair of legs shifted function. Instead of walking, they became weapons. The femur and tibia developed opposing rows of sharp spines that close together like the teeth of a trap. The tibia folds back against the femur with extraordinary force and speed. The result is a limb that can seize prey in a fraction of a second and hold it with enough mechanical strength that almost nothing can pull free. The triangular, freely rotating head evolved alongside the forelimbs, a predator that strikes with its arms, rather than lunging forward with its whole body, needed eyes that could track independently of its posture. So the mantis developed a neck, a rarity among insects, and placed at the front of its head two large forward-facing compound eyes, capable of detecting the finest movements at distance. The result is an animal that can remain completely still while tracking a target with its eyes alone, revealing nothing of its intention until the very last moment. The camouflage adaptations came later, or rather they diversified later, evolving in parallel across dozens of lineages. Some mantis species came to resemble the bark of specific tree species. Others evolved to look precisely like dead leaves, complete with false veins and artificial blemishes. A remarkable group in Southeast Asia evolved flower mimicry. The orchid mantis, Hymenopus coronatus, developed petal-shaped extensions on its legs and a coloration so faithful to the flowers it inhabits that pollinating insects approach it voluntarily. Some mantis species are not ambush hunters so much as lures, drawing prey to themselves by resembling something inviting rather than something dangerous. This diversity of form, all built on the same ancient chassis, speaks to the adaptability of the mantis blueprint. The core design, stillness, patience, speed, grip, is old. But evolution has deployed it in an extraordinary range of ecological contexts, producing a family of hunters as varied in appearance as they are uniform in strategy. Part 3. The Life Cycle. Phase 1. Birth and Emergence. The story begins with the egg case, the Euthyca. In the final weeks of her life, a female praying mantis undergoes one of the most physically demanding acts in the insect world. She selects a surface, a branch, a fence post, a stone wall, a dried plant stem, and begins to produce a foam from glands in her abdomen. This foam is not random. It is a precisely engineered biological material, secreted and then aerated by the rhythmic movement of her abdomen, which beats the substance into a froth as it emerges. The foam hardens on contact with air, forming a protective casing that is simultaneously flexible and durable, capable of insulating the eggs within against temperature fluctuations, retaining moisture, and resisting many of the pathogens and parasites that would otherwise devastate a clutch of insect eggs. As she builds the foam structure layer by layer, she deposits her eggs within it, anywhere from 10 to 400 of them, depending on the species. The eggs are arranged in precise rows within the casing, each one oriented so that the embryo inside faces outward toward the surface layer, which will become the emergence channel when the time comes. The whole process takes hours. When she's finished, she often rests near the case briefly before moving on. She will not return. The Euthyca is left entirely to the environment. Over the weeks that follow, it will be subjected to whatever the season delivers. In temperate regions, this typically means winter, and the Euthyca has evolved specifically to survive it. The foam structure provides remarkable insulation, and the eggs within are biochemically prepared for diapause, a state of suspended development that allows them to pause the growth clock until conditions improve. When spring arrives, when temperatures rise consistently above a threshold that varies by species, the developmental clock resumes. Inside each egg, an embryo that has been waiting, metabolically quiet, through months of cold begins to grow. The process accelerates, cells divide, body plans assemble, and then, in the space of a few warm mornings, the first nymphs are ready. Emergence is a group event, though it is not coordinated in any deliberate sense. The nymphs along the outer layer reach the exit channel first. They push through the soft, permeable cap of the Utica and emerge into the light, dangling briefly from thin silken threads secreted from their abdomens. A brief, spider-like rappel that carries them away from the case and onto whatever surface lies below. The threads break. They land. And within minutes the instinct to move, to disperse, to get away from siblings who are already at this moment potential predators, takes over entirely. This first journey, from the Utica to wherever the nymph ends up, may cover only a few centimetres. But it is already one of the most dangerous moments of the mantis's life. Spiders are often waiting. Ants patrol the surfaces below. Birds, with their sharp eyes for movement, notice the cascade of tiny bodies with immediate interest. Mortality in the first 24 hours after emergence is extraordinary. In laboratory conditions, survivorship is high. In the field, the losses are staggering. Those that survive find themselves alone and extraordinarily small in a world designed, it seems, entirely around killing them. Phase 2. The juvenile. The nymph that has just survived emergence is called a first instar nymph. It looks remarkably like a miniature adult, already possessing the triangular head, the raptorial forelimbs, the alert, sweeping antennae. But it has no wings. Its exoskeleton is thin and pale, almost translucent in some species, and it has not eaten. In many species, the first instar nymph cannot eat even if it tries. Its mouth parts are not yet fully functional for consuming prey larger than the very smallest springtails or fruit flies. Some individuals may consume the silk of their emergence thread. Some eat the shed skins of siblings. But the early days are defined primarily by movement, by the imperative to disperse, to find cover, and to avoid the extraordinary number of things that want to eat them. The mantis grows through a series of molts, a process called incomplete metamorphosis, or hemimetabolism, meaning it does not undergo the radical transformation of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Instead, it sheds its exoskeleton periodically, each time emerging slightly larger, slightly more capable, its wings, if it will eventually have them, gradually developing as external wing pads that grow with each successive molt. The number of instars varies by species and sex. Most mantis species pass through 5 to 9 molts before reaching adulthood. Each molt is a crisis. The mantis must find a secure location, typically hanging from a branch or stem, and split its old exoskeleton along precise seam lines, extracting every limb, including the delicate antennae, the compound eyes, the spined forelimbs, from the old casing without breaking anything. The new exoskeleton beneath is soft and pale, and the mantis is completely vulnerable during this process. It cannot run. It cannot strike. Its exoskeleton needs hours, sometimes more than a day, to harden fully. During this window, even prey animals that it would normally hunt can kill it. Between molts, the nymph must hunt, and here something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. Even in the first few instars, the mantis demonstrates a predatory competence that is remarkable for an animal with no parental instruction. The tracking behaviour, the slow, swaying body movement that mimics vegetation moving in wind while simultaneously helping the mantis judge distance through parallax, appears from the very beginning. Young nymphs will stalk prey many times their own size. They will wait motionless for extraordinary periods. They will abort strikes if the angle is wrong, and reposition, sometimes over the course of many minutes, to achieve a better approach. This is not learning in any conscious sense. It is programming. But it is programming of breathtaking sophistication. The diet of a young mantis is opportunistic and carnivorous from the outset. First and second instar nymphs take springtails, aphids, and small flies. By the third and fourth instar they are hunting larger flies, small moths, juvenile crickets, and in some cases other mantis nymphs. The cannibalistic tendency, which will later become famous in the context of reproduction, is present throughout the life cycle. A mantis encountering a smaller mantis will frequently attempt to eat it. This is not aberrant behavior, it is efficient. The protein is exactly what is needed. As the nymph grows through successive instars, its hunting range expands, its accuracy improves. The strike, already mechanically impressive, becomes more reliably targeted. The triangular head rotates to lock onto prey. The antennae, sensitive to the finest vibrations in the air and along surfaces, provide additional sensory data. And the mantis begins to develop what researchers have described as a genuine sense of individual strategy, varying its approach based on prey type, environmental conditions, and the specific geometry of each encounter. By the later instars, a growing mantis nymph is already one of the most dangerous things in its immediate environment for any insect of comparable or smaller size. But it is still, for all its competence, desperately vulnerable to the world above it. Phase 3. Survival Challenges. The life of a mantis nymph is a sustained negotiation between predatory ambition and constant mortal threat. The list of things that hunt a mantis is long and various. Birds are perhaps the most significant predator across most of the mantis's range. Many species of songbird actively search for mantis nymphs, and the nymph's camouflage, already developing through the early instars, is its primary defense. The cryptic coloration and body shape of most mantis species is not incidental. It is the product of millions of years of selection pressure applied by exactly the sharp-eyed mobile predators that eat them. A mantis nymph on a green stem is almost impossible to see if it holds still. The swaying, slow motion that mimics wind-moved vegetation is a specific adaptation to defeat the pattern recognition systems of bird vision, which are tuned to detect movement. But when camouflage fails, when a bird sees through the disguise or gets close enough that stillness is no longer sufficient, the mantis has a secondary defense. It performs a diamatic display, suddenly spreading its forelegs wide, raising its wings if it has them, and revealing bright warning colours on the undersides of its limbs, flashes of black, orange and white that appear suddenly in the predator's visual field. This startled display does not always work, but it buys time. Sometimes that is enough. Spiders are an ever-present threat throughout the nymph phase, particularly orb weavers, whose webs are stretched across exactly the kind of vegetation that young mantis nymphs inhabit. A nymph that steps into a web is, in most cases, lost. The spider responds within seconds. A few mantis species can bite through silk and extract themselves, but most cannot. The mantis that avoids walking into a web is the one that survives to pass on whatever instincts governed its path. There is also the threat from above that arrives in darkness. Bats. And here, the mantis has evolved one of its most remarkable and least intuitive adaptations. Many adult mantis species, and some late instar nymphs, possess a single, midline ear located on the underside of the thorax between the hind legs. This is not a pair of ears. It is a single organ, and it is tuned specifically to the ultrasonic frequencies used by echolocating bats. When a mantis in flight detects a bat's echolocation call, it responds with a dramatic evasive maneuver, folding its wings and diving into a spiraling descent that makes it nearly impossible to track. The response is automated neurologically wired and extraordinarily effective. Studies have shown that mantises equipped with this ear are significantly less likely to be caught by hunting bats than those with the ear experimentally blocked. The fact that the mantis only has one ear rather than two means it cannot determine the direction the bat call is coming from. It simply knows a bat is nearby and it drops. This seems like an imprecise solution. But in the dark, in the air, the fastest way to survive a bat encounter is not to locate the bat precisely. It is simply to get out of the sky as quickly as possible. Phase 4. Reaching maturity. After passing through the final molt, the molt that produces the fully winged sexually mature adult, the praying mantis enters what is both the pinnacle of its existence and the beginning of its end. The adult mantis is, by almost any measure, a spectacular predator. Depending on the species, it may be anywhere from 2 centimeters to over 16 centimeters in length. The Chinese mantis, Tenodera sinensis, which has been widely introduced across North America, can reach 15 centimeters, large enough to prey on small vertebrates. Accounts and documented photographs exist of adult mantises capturing and consuming small hummingbirds, tree frogs, small lizards, and juvenile mice. These are not routine events, but they are not anomalies either. A large mantis in good condition will attack prey that dwarfs it if the opportunity presents itself. The hunting strategy of the adult mantis is built on patience. It selects a position on a flower, at a branch junction, on a leaf surface, and it waits. Its camouflage keeps it invisible to passing insects. When prey comes within range, typically within a body length or two, the mantis begins the tracking sequence. The head rotates, the antennae sweep, the body shifts, almost imperceptibly, to optimize the strike angle. The strike itself is one of the fastest movements in the biological world. The spiked tibia snaps closed against the femur in under 50 milliseconds. At these speeds, the prey animal has no time to respond. The spines of the femur and tibia interlock around the prey's body, securing it with a grip that most insects cannot break. The mantis then bites through the neck or the back of the head first, severing the neural connections that would allow the prey to struggle effectively before consuming it at leisure. The mantis does not use venom. It does not spin webs. It does not lure with bioluminescence or chemical signals, with the fascinating exception of the flower mantises, which use visual mimicry to draw pollinators close. The mantis's weapon is its body, specifically the integration of sensory precision, mechanical speed, and the willingness to wait indefinitely for the right moment. Adult mantises are also for the first time capable of sustained flight. Males in particular are highly mobile, flying considerable distances after dark in search of females. This is when the bat detection ear becomes most critical. Night flight is efficient for dispersal, but terrifying in terms of predation risk. The males that survive to find females are, in a very real sense, the most bat evasion capable individuals in the population. Phase 5. Reproduction and the question of cannibalism. The question that everyone asks about praying mantises is this: does the female always eat the male after or during mating? The answer is sometimes, and the nuances of when, why, and how often this happens are some of the most interesting in behavioral ecology. Sexual cannibalism in mantises has been documented across dozens of species, but the frequency varies enormously, from essentially never in some species to relatively common in others. Early laboratory studies produced alarming rates of cannibalism, leading to the popular image of the mantis as a routine widowmaker. But these studies were conducted under conditions of extreme stress. The animals were confined, they could not escape each other, and they were often food deprived. Under more naturalistic conditions, cannibalism occurs at much lower rates. When cannibalism does occur, it typically follows a specific pattern. The female strikes at the male when he approaches, or, in some documented cases, during mating itself, consuming him from the head downward while the rest of his body continues the reproductive act. This is not a failure of mating. In many mantis species, the male's body continues to transfer sperm after decapitation because the relevant neural ganglia are distributed throughout the thorax and abdomen rather than concentrated in the brain. The body, in other words, knows what to do even after the head is gone. From an evolutionary standpoint, the male being eaten has been analysed as a form of nuptial gift. The nutrients from his body increase the female's reproductive output, and since the male will die shortly regardless of whether he is eaten, his fitness interest may actually be served by being consumed. Some researchers have even proposed that certain male behaviours, approaching from downwind, moving slowly, performing specific courtship displays, function partly to delay or prevent cannibalism long enough to complete mating, but not to prevent it entirely if the female is sufficiently hungry. This framing of the male as simultaneously mate and meal has proven uncomfortable to many people because it maps so easily onto human anxieties about gender and power. The mantis has, as a result, become a cultural shorthand for dangerous femininity, for the devouring of the masculine by the feminine. This is a projection. The mantis is doing none of this symbolically. It is doing it metabolically. The female needs calories. She's just spent an enormous amount of energy mating, and she will need an enormous amount more to produce the ootheca. A male mantis represents a high-quality protein source that is readily available. The system, seen purely in evolutionary terms, is ruthlessly practical. The female, having mated, sometimes with multiple males over the course of her adult life, prepares to produce her eggs. She selects a substrate. She begins producing the foam, and the cycle begins again. Phase 6. Death. The female praying mantis, having produced her ootheca or oothecae, some species produce multiple cases across their adult lifespan, declines rapidly. She may have been fighting cold temperatures already. She may be physically depleted from the energy demands of foam production. In temperate regions, the first hard frosts typically arrive in the weeks following peak egg-laying activity in autumn, and the adults who have no cold tolerance in this phase of their lives succumb to them. The death of an adult mantis is not violent for the most part. It is metabolic. The cold slows the nervous system. Movement becomes difficult. The animal that was, a few weeks ago, capable of striking a hummingbird out of the air now sits motionless on a branch, not from choice, but from physiological limitation. It dies in place, often still clinging to the plant that sheltered it. Its body decomposes into the soil below. The eggs, though, are already hardening in the cold, already waiting. Part 4. Biology and Adaptations. The praying mantis is, biologically, an extraordinary integration of systems, each one refined to a degree that makes the whole seem almost engineered. Start with the eyes. A mantis has 2 large compound eyes, positioned at the corners of its triangular head, giving it nearly 360 degrees of visual coverage. But unlike most insects, which use their 2 compound eyes primarily for detecting movement across a wide field, the mantis has a specialized region of each eye, the fovea, that provides high acuity vision in the forward direction. These 2 forward-facing foveal regions overlap. providing binocular vision and the ability to judge distance through parallax. This binocular vision is the basis of the mantis's depth perception, and it is the key to the accuracy of the strike. In a study published in 2016, researchers fitted mantises with tiny three-dimensional glasses, fitting coloured filters over each eye, and presented them with moving targets on a screen. The mantises struck at targets displayed in 3 dimensions with a precision that demonstrated genuine stereoscopic depth calculation. But here is the striking detail. The neural algorithm the mantis uses to compute depth is completely different from the one used by vertebrates, including humans. Where human depth perception is based on comparing the static images from each eye, the mantis compares the differences between each eye's changing images over time, a motion-based system that is particularly effective for detecting and striking at moving prey. Evolution arrived at the same functional outcome through an entirely different route. The raptorial forelimbs are perhaps the most immediately impressive anatomical feature. The femur, the larger upper segment, carries a double row of sharp spines on its inner surface. The tibia, the lower segment, which hinges against the femur like a jackknife blade, carries a matching row. When the strike is triggered, the tibia snaps closed against the femur in a motion so fast it generates forces that would challenge many mechanical systems. The spines interdigitate, forming a cage around the prey. The grip is maintained passively. The locked spines do not require muscular effort to sustain, meaning a mantis can hold a struggling prey animal indefinitely without fatigue. The camouflage systems of mantis species are among the most diverse and detailed in the insect world. Beyond simple colour matching, many species have evolved body shapes that actively mimic environmental features. The deadleaf mantis of Southeast Asia, Deroplates desiccata, has a flattened body with irregular margins that reproduce the outline of a decomposing leaf, including a darkened midrib and false blemishes that match the discoloration patterns of real dead leaves in its habitat. The orchid mantis, Hymenopus coronatus, has lobed extensions on its legs that resemble petals, and its coloration shifts with age and environmental conditions to match the specific flowers of its habitat. Remarkably, research has shown that the orchid mantis is not merely camouflaged within flowers. It is more attractive to pollinators than actual flowers, because its visual signal to insects is, on certain measures, stronger than the flowers it mimics. The nervous system of the mantis is highly distributed, a chain of ganglia running the length of the body, each capable of controlling local functions relatively independently. This is why a decapitated male can continue mating, but it is also why the mantis's reaction time is so extraordinarily fast. The strike is not processed through the brain in the conventional sense. Once the trigger threshold is reached, once the prey has entered the zone and the tracking calculation is complete, the strike is executed through a rapid neural pathway that bypasses the higher processing centers. The brain decides to strike. The actual mechanics are handled locally in the thoracic ganglia with minimal delay. Part 5: Ecosystem Role. The praying mantis occupies a specific and important niche in the ecosystems it inhabits. It is a mid-level generalist predator of invertebrates, sitting above most herbivorous insects and below most vertebrate predators, with significant effects on the insect communities around it. As a predator, the mantis exerts pressure on a wide range of prey species. Its generalist appetite, it will take almost any insect of appropriate size, means it does not specialize in a single prey type, which gives it a stabilizing influence on insect community structure. Where mantis populations are high, The abundance of any single prey species is typically lower because the mantis does not deplete one prey population and then crash along with it. It shifts. It takes whatever is available. This role as a generalist suppressor of insect populations has made the mantis a subject of genuine interest in agricultural contexts. In many parts of the world, mantis egg cases are sold commercially to gardeners and farmers as biological pest control agents. The logic is straightforward. A mantis population in a garden or crop field will consume aphids, caterpillars, whiteflies, and a range of other pest species. The reality is more complicated. A mantis will also consume beneficial insects, pollinators, predatory beetles, other biocontrol agents, with perfect indifference. The mantis does not distinguish between pest and beneficial. It distinguishes between catchable and not catchable. This limits its utility as a targeted biocontrol agent, but it does not undermine its broader ecological value as a generalist suppressor. There is also the role of the mantis as prey. Despite its formidable defences, the mantis is eaten by a remarkable diversity of predators: bats, birds, large spiders, assassin bugs, parasitic wasps, and in some cases, larger mantises. The biomass represented by mantis populations is not trivial, and the energy flow from insect through mantises into the birds and bats that eat them represents a meaningful pathway in the food webs of temperate and tropical ecosystems. Parasitoid wasps deserve special mention. Several wasp species in the family Coelionidae are specialized parasitoids of mantis egg cases. A female wasp will locate an Ithaca and deposit her own eggs within it, sometimes hundreds of them, where the wasp larvae develop by consuming the mantis eggs from within. In some regions and some years, parasitoid pressure on mantis egg cases can be severe, with the majority of eggs in a case consumed before they can hatch. This represents a tight, highly co-evolved relationship between predator and parasite, one that has almost certainly been running in parallel with the mantis lineage for millions of years. There's also a curious and relatively recently documented relationship between the praying mantis and a parasite called Nematomorpha, the horsehair worm. These parasitic worms infect the mantis as a larva, developing within the mantis's body cavity over months, feeding on the mantis's fat reserves and growing to extraordinary lengths, sometimes longer than the mantis's entire body several times over. When the worm is ready to reproduce, it needs water, because it is an aquatic organism in its adult phase. It achieves this by chemically manipulating the mantis's nervous system, hijacking the brain's navigation systems to drive the mantis to seek water. An infected mantis will walk directly into streams and ponds, something a healthy mantis would never do. The worm then erupts from the mantis's body, sometimes still knotted and writhing, and swims away to reproduce. The mantis, remarkably, often survives this emergence and returns to life on land, thinner, depleted, but alive. The parasite has taken everything it needs without killing its host, an elegance of evolutionary co-adaptation that is difficult not to regard with a kind of horrified admiration. Part 6. Human Connection and Conservation. The praying mantis has lived alongside humanity for as long as human beings have inhabited the regions where mantises occur, and the relationship has generated an extraordinary body of mythology, symbolism, and practical interaction. In ancient Egypt, a mantis deity, the mantis god, was associated with guiding the souls of the dead. The mantis's apparent stillness and the position of its raised forelimbs, which can look, in certain postures, genuinely like an attitude of prayer or supplication, invited projection across cultures separated by enormous distances. The prayer interpretation, which gives the animal its common name in English and many other European languages, is purely anthropomorphic, of course. The mantis holds its forelimbs raised not from reverence, but because that is the position from which the strike can be most rapidly executed. It is not praying, it is poised. The Khoisan people of southern Africa developed one of the most elaborate cultural relationships with the mantis. The trickster god Kagan, often depicted as a mantis, features centrally in Khoisan mythology and is credited with the dizzying array of creative and destructive acts, creating the eland antelope, creating the moon, being killed and resurrected repeatedly, bringing fire. The mantis in this tradition is not simply an insect. It is a conduit between the human and the sacred, a creature whose combination of stillness, precision, and sudden explosive action mirrors qualities valued in hunters and spiritual practitioners alike. In East Asian cultures, the mantis became a symbol of courage and ferocity disproportionate to its size. The praying mantis kung fu style, developed in Shandong province in China and attributed historically to the 17th century martial artist Wang Lang, was inspired specifically by the mantis's raptorial strike. The rapid grabbing motion, the locked grip, the economical repositioning. Practitioners of the style were said to study live mantises to refine their technique. The style spread across China and eventually around the world, and remains one of the most widely practiced forms of traditional Chinese martial arts. In contemporary Western culture, the mantis has settled into a somewhat paradoxical position, simultaneously beloved as a garden companion and pet insect, and feared as a symbol of feminine danger and unpredictable violence. The sexual cannibalism mythology has proven especially durable, appearing in everything from horror film metaphors to advertising copy. The mantis as icon exists at the intersection of admiration and unease. We are drawn to its apparent intelligence and its alien beauty, and unsettled by its remorseless efficiency. As a pet, the mantis has become increasingly popular over the past 2 decades. The exotic pet trade now supports a thriving community of mantis keepers, Mantidea enthusiasts who breed and keep dozens of species from around the world, from the tiny bark mantis to the spectacular ghost mantis, Philocrania paradoxa, to the jaw-dropping dead leaf and orchid species. This community has produced a substantial body of husbandry knowledge, and some of the behavioral observations made by experienced keepers have contributed meaningfully to scientific understanding of mantis behavior. In terms of formal conservation, the majority of mantis species are not currently considered threatened. The order Mantidea is large, cosmopolitan, and generally adaptable. Most species are not dependent on highly specialized habitats, and many have proven capable of persisting in human-modified landscapes, parks, gardens, agricultural margins, and urban green spaces. There are exceptions. Island endemic species with small geographic ranges are inherently vulnerable to habitat loss. Several species in Southeast Asian rainforest systems, the orchid mantis among them, are potentially affected by the large-scale deforestation transforming that region. The international wildlife trade, while less severe a pressure for mantises than for charismatic vertebrates, does create harvesting pressure on some wild populations of highly desirable species. More broadly, the mantis faces the pressures facing all invertebrates in the modern world: habitat fragmentation, pesticide use, and the disruption of insect communities by invasive species and changing land use. Pesticide application is particularly relevant. The mantis, as a generalist predator, occupies a position in food webs that concentrates toxins from across the insect community it eats. Sublethal pesticide exposure has been shown to affect mantis strike accuracy, reproductive output, and survivorship. The introduced Chinese mantis and the European mantis, both deliberately or accidentally established across North America over the past century and a half, are now the most commonly encountered mantis species across much of the continent, and there is ongoing discussion about whether their presence affects native mantis species and native insect communities more broadly. The introduced species are larger, more aggressive, and in some areas more abundant than native species. The interactions between these introduced predators and native ecosystems remain only partially understood. What is certain is that the mantis, in all its diversity and geographical spread, remains a meaningful and functionally important component of the ecosystems it inhabits, and a creature whose biology continues to surprise researchers across multiple scientific disciplines. Part 7. Final Thoughts. We began this story on a fence post at the edge of a meadow in the pale light of an October morning. We began with a crack in a foam casing, and something almost too small to see pulling itself into the world. That nymph, that 4mm thread of translucent potential, faced odds that most animals never confront so starkly or so immediately. The world was not indifferent to it. The world was actively hostile. Spiders waited, birds watched. The cold was already in the air. Its siblings were competitors, and it had, from the very first moment, no one, no parent, no guidance, no shelter that had been prepared for it. Nothing but the program written into its cells over 85 million years of accumulated evolutionary refinement. And yet, if it survived, if it navigated the first molt, made the first kill, found the camouflage position that a passing bird's eye slid over rather than fixing on, it became something remarkable. It became an animal that could track a moving target with the precision of a targeting system, that could hold still for hours in a way that defeated the perception of dozens of other creatures, that could strike faster than the human eye could register, that could, in its final weeks, contribute to the perpetuation of a lineage older than the Rocky Mountains. The life of a praying mantis is not long. In a world of elephants and tortoises and bristlecone pines, 12 months is barely a moment. But the compression of that life, the intensity of what is packed into it, from the desperate scramble of emergence to the final, frost-stilled stillness of an adult female on an autumn stem, is extraordinary. Every day of a mantis's existence is a negotiation between absolute vulnerability and absolute precision, between the smallness of the body and the ambition of the predator within it. In this episode, we trace that life from its beginning in the careful chemistry of the Eutheca, that remarkable foam structure, built layer by layer by a female who will not live to see what emerges, through the perilous early instars, where most of the story ends before it properly begins. We followed the survivors through successive molts and growing competence, through the biological gauntlet of spiders and birds and horsehair worms and bat-filled nights, to the final molt that produces the adult, winged, sexually mature, and at the peak of its predatory capability. We examined the mechanics of the strike, one of the fastest and most precise movements in the natural world, and the neuroscience of depth perception that makes it possible. We explored the complicated truth of sexual cannibalism, not the gothic horror it is so often portrayed as, but a metabolic transaction that evolution has, in certain species and certain circumstances, found to be mutually advantageous. We considered the mantis's place in the ecosystems it inhabits, as predator, as prey, as host to parasites whose ingenuity rivals its own. And we traced the long thread of human fascination with this creature, from Egyptian and Khoisan mythology to Chinese martial arts to the community of contemporary keepers who study it with something approaching reverence. What we are left with, what I am left with at least, is something like admiration. Not the anthropomorphic kind, not the admiration that projects intention or wisdom onto a creature operating entirely on instinct and evolutionary program, but the deeper kind, the kind that comes from understanding just how extraordinary the program is. The mantis does not know it is ancient. It does not know that its basic design has outlasted the dinosaurs. It does not know that its strike is a wonder of biomechanics, that its depth perception is a marvel of convergent evolution, that its egg case is a feat of biological engineering that human materials science has only recently begun to appreciate. It knows none of this. It simply waits, it watches, it strikes. And in the spring, from a small foam case on a fence post at the edge of a meadow, dozens of its children will climb into the light and scatter, each one carrying in the compressed chemistry of its cells everything that 85 million years of survival has learned. That is not nothing. That, in fact, is everything. If you enjoyed this episode of Animal Uncovered, following the podcast is the best way to support the show. And if there's an animal you want us to uncover next, leave a review or comment and let us know. Until next time.